Okay. All right. So we're recording, and I guess Irvin's up first with ransomware.
Yeah, but this time from the angle of managed service providers. I used to work for a managed service provider. So when I saw this article, I was like, oh no. But that is a new way to get into many clients. You hit the MSP, and if they're bad enough that they have their services directly connected to their clients, then yeah, that's an easy way to spread ransomware to the clients and get more people down at once.
I've been worried about this because I use cloud providers, and it seems to me that if I had a smart enough piece of ransomware, it could connect through my browser and go to my cloud provider and delete my backups. So I wish my cloud provider had an option of backups that could not be erased for 90 days or something. I think they should do it.
Right. But the way that this made it seem was like they have services directly connected to their clients from the MSP's office.
Oh,
At
yeah.
least that was what I got out of it. And my first thought was, why would you do that?
Oh, I know this is what happened to Target, and I know another company that does that. It's quite common that people have some kind of subcontractor, and they have an ability to log back into you. So a breach down there will be a backdoor into your network.
Which is fine, but I mean, there's things called LogMeIn where you don't have to be directly connected. You know, your computer does not have to be directly connected to your client. You go through a loop, and that's fine because things like this wouldn't happen. It's just one of those. Why are you lazy?
Well, I think it would still happen if your ransomware was smart enough to use your automatic login or something.
But I mean, normally the ransomware isn't that smart. It's just going for the lowest hanging fruit, because that's.
Oh, I'm not so sure. I think it's pretty smart these days, but I don't know the details.
I wonder about companies that do like a lot of RDP and stuff like that, where they're doing like remote support and just taking control of their clients' machines. That seems like that would be a pretty good. That seems like that'd be a pretty good vector to hit if you were doing, especially if you were doing it manually instead of just using like some automated malware.
Yeah, my RDP client I've got on here automatically logs into my cloud machines. My LastPass automatically logs into my other cloud providers. A good piece of ransomware on here could wipe out everything. And I need a defense at each end. Even a local defense like Microsoft's ransomware protection would not save me. It would only protect my local files.
Yeah.
So I was mocking these people for not having backups until I realized how much I don't have backups. Once you're sprawled across a bunch of cloud services, it's nearly impossible to back it all up properly.
Yeah, and the backups don't quite flow between one and another. Like I can't get stuff from DigitalOcean off to GCP or back and forth. They're all separate from each other.
What's that about DigitalOcean?
I said I can't get backups from DigitalOcean onto GCP.
No, I don't think you can. I have local snapshots on DigitalOcean, but they could just be deleted at any time.
Yeah.
They ought to have a cold storage snapshot or just a snapshot that can't be deleted for 30 days or something, and I'd be a lot happier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my first article. So
okay.
MSPs, watch out, because you're also a target.
Yeah. Well, I got one that just came in last night. Richard Stallman just appeared at Microsoft, but yesterday was forced to resign. So he has a long history of strange behavior towards women and trying to pick them up in disgusting ways. And now he's had published articles about published statements that he defends Jeffrey Epstein, and they really shouldn't be so upset about sex with underage people and whether it's coerced or not. And I don't know what that is, but anyway, so he had to resign from the Free Software Foundation. Hold on while I try to find out what this nonsense is.
Your first link.
Somebody must be playing garbage. Okay, one of these tabs is playing garbage. I try to turn off automatic sound in the browser, but they just spam right through it. That's ZDNet. Anyway, so he's been forced out of MIT entirely, apparently, and out of the Free Software Foundation, which he created for sexual misconduct. of, again, a sort of unspecified kind. And now that it's out, a bunch of people are coming forward with statements about how they were warned he was creepy and you have to lock your office door, and everybody knew it, but nobody dared do anything because he was so important. So I think this is the latest skirmish in the Me Too movement. We've been seeing this over the last several years as the culture of men just exploiting women becomes more and more unacceptable. And I see it with Kavanaugh and everything. And of course, there's another side where all these people are going down just for accusations. Nothing is ever proven, but the battle rages on. He's the latest one to go down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was even, I've known a little bit about his reputation, but I was still a little bit surprised by, all that.
Well, MIT has a huge image problem because they took money from Epstein and they tried to conceal it. And then it all came out. And so the head of their media foundation had to quit. And I hear the right-wingers saying, you shouldn't be punishing anybody until you can prove it. But it's not that simple to prove these things. And I just don't think there's a simple answer. It's kind of like the abortion debate. There are two sides, and you can't satisfy them both.
Well, an old saying comes to mind, which is, it's not the crime that gets you in trouble, it's the cover-up, which in this case, it kind of sounds like that.
Well, right. That was true for the media director, but Stallman didn't cover anything up. But apparently, another thing I saw, which surprised me, is MIT has always had a policy that it's okay for professors to have sex with students as long as they're not responsible for grading that student. And as far as I know, every other college has abandoned that long ago, even UC Berkeley, sort of the center of the free love movement. That's pretty outrageous, I think. They seem to be the last holdout of that idea.
Interesting.
Yeah, let's see what you've got, Liz.
So my first one's it's actually kind of an op-ed piece in the Register, but I thought it was interesting because it's an angle I hadn't really thought about before in terms of cybersecurity insurance, which is becoming more and more of a prevalent idea now. And it was actually kind of considering the angle that getting this insurance could actually make the ransomware problem worse, because it's basically, it's almost a guaranteed payout each time, because they will just pay the ransom instead of, but what kind of blows my mind is that that's apparently still cheaper than maintaining backups, kind of like we talked about previously. So I just thought that was a really interesting angle that I hadn't really considered before about cybersecurity insurance.
Reports I've heard have said that even when people have backups, it's so expensive and slow to use them that it's still cheaper to pay the ransom.
It's crazy.
Well, I think ransomware would be very easy to stop. It does ridiculous, suspicious things like write all the files it can reach within a few seconds. So it seems like you could just implement heuristic detection for it on the client side and in the cloud providers. And I would think we're going to see that in the next year or so. You could just implement ransomware protection and that would knock this stuff off. But I don't know. Right now, it's just a license to print money and it's growing explosively.
Yeah, I'm still with you, Liz, of backups take too long. I mean, when I used to work for the MSP, in an hour, we could bring a server backup.
Yeah.
We're saying it would take weeks to generate all their systems. I don't know why.
Yeah, we would do that because people would mess up, and so for an hour remotely, we would bring everything back up from the last backup, whether it was 15 minutes ago to a day ago, and life is restored and everybody's good, and we moved on. And that was just part of the monthly contract, and everyone was covered.
Yeah, that's certainly true for the individual servers I have in the cloud. I can just restore them in 5 minutes. It makes me think, again, their backup solution must not be good enough where everything is getting backed up. And I think you have issues like your firewall configurations and your router configurations, but I don't know if ransomware is hitting them. It'd be nice to have a study and find out what's really happening in real world cases.
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
that'd be really
I guess it's hitting the desktops and the servers, and only hitting the servers because of the desktops. Yeah, I don't think it's hitting the routers or the firewalls yet.
Yeah, but people have told me in practice that everybody just pays the ransom. It's the cheapest, fastest option. I mean, it looks like we're back to you, Irvin.
Yeah. This is that
This one.
the textbook case of make sure all your bases are covered before you do a pen test. Two men in Dallas were paid to see if they can get into a Dallas courthouse, and well, they did physical intrusion and got arrested.
But
Because that wasn't written in, so yeah, the admin didn't anticipate a forced entry. They thought it was just gonna be virtual. But these
Yeah.
folks, these guys took it upon themselves to also do physical entry.
Yeah. Well,
If you're
that's an
gonna-
issue. Then they exceeded the scope.
Right, exactly. They exceeded the scope, and now they're paying the price for exceeding the scope.
Yeah.
Assume anything.
Well, it says in the description that they were on contract to test out the alarm system and to gauge law enforcement's response time, and it sounds like they did both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the cost of doing business, I guess.
You gotta watch out for throwing in those free bonuses on your pen tests.
Yeah,
Sometimes the client doesn't always appreciate it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure everything's written down and everything's clear before you do it, because otherwise you'll be like that.
Yeah. Well, here's one. China says first they recently said they want to stop the Bitcoin mining. And then they say they want to maybe make their own digital currency. There's a huge belief in the cryptocurrency community that we need a digital currency, and I just don't get it. We have Visa and MasterCard. Everybody can use them. I don't understand why people think we need a digital currency. And all, even very smart people I respect say, oh, yes, one of these cryptocurrencies is going to win, and they're going to make a pile of money. And I just don't see it. I'm afraid I had a time as a financial professional, and all the financial professionals are pretty much looking at it saying, when are you kids going to stop playing Monopoly with fake money and just knock it off? What is the point of this stuff? I don't get it. Why does anybody need Bitcoin? I'm not getting it.
It's great for theft.
Well, not really. It's actually a terrible system to commit crime because there's a permanent public ledger. I mean, Zcash would be better if you want to do money laundering. But if you're not trying to commit a crime, I don't understand what this stuff is for. It's a fun cryptographic game, but it doesn't actually help you accomplish anything with money that you can't accomplish better with existing structures. Of course, this is what people said about the computer and the internet. What is this garbage? We're fine with our typewriters. So maybe I'm just old and square, but I'm just not seeing it.
No, I'm not sold into Bitcoin. I understand getting information and putting a monetary value like Facebook's information on everyone, but just giving a random string, a cryptographic string, monetary value, this doesn't click with me.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting economic experiment to sort of discuss the philosophy of what money is and what fiat money is. And if you really thought that all the governments and banks were going to collapse at any moment, then you might think Bitcoin is more of a, and that I think was the original motivation. After the 2008 financial crisis, the man that created it thought that the banks were all unreliable and going to collapse, and so we needed something else. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Isn't that why we have the metals, the precious metals?
Well, yeah, and that's right. There are like 4 use cases for Bitcoin: to store value, to perform transactions, as an investment, and I forget the last one. And if you do financial analysis, there are already existing solutions for each of these that are much better, and it fails for all of these. So it's an interesting mathematical puzzle, but people are throwing money at it as if it's going to be worth something. And I think from the internet, everybody's gotten used to investing in something, even if it makes no sense and doesn't make a profit, assuming that later somebody will decide it's great. And
Right.
I just don't see what's going to be great about this someday. And the man that made Libra said it's going to end poverty, it's going to save the poor people, or somehow the poor people in non-technological nations are going to be glad they got Libra. And I don't get it. You know, what they want is like food and water.
Right. The real
Well,
basic essentials.
I'll tell you who's excited about that, and that's North Korean hackers, which
Yes.
is my next story.
Oh, yeah.
The Treasury Department put out a story last week. The U.S. Treasury Department put out this notice that they were trying to come down hard on nation-state hackers in North Korea who've been not just stealing cryptocurrency, though they've sure gotten a lot of that. It says in here something like I think it was $571 million in cryptocurrency in the course of like a year and a half from Asian crypto exchanges, but also real money, and lots of it because they were targeting. They got millions of dollars from other countries, but in our country they also targeted the banking systems and the SWIFT system, which is pretty interesting to me because that's really integral to our banking infrastructure, and they found a way to hit it. I've heard before that system is pretty brittle because it's real old, and there are a lot of holes in it, and it makes you wonder. They didn't release a figure for what they got from that, but it makes you wonder how frequently that system's targeted and how often cyber criminals get money out of it.
Yeah, SWIFT I think is due for an upgrade, and that would be the logical target for something like Bitcoin to be used for large financial transfers between nations. But I think they did upgrade it recently, and they're getting there to try to respond to all this.
Yeah, well, they're definitely basically the only thing that pointed it out. They'd gotten millions of dollars out of the SWIFT system. They were trying to steal like 851 million, according to this release, but a typo was what got them caught before they got the full amount. So it didn't say how much they actually did get, which in that case, I'm guessing it was quite a bit of money. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's largely how North Korea funds their government.
They got like $80 million out of the Central Bank of Bangladesh's Federal Reserve account, which I think is interesting that they're targeting the Fed, and apparently successfully. So interesting.
Yeah. And this one surprised me. What's wrong with Doe, Irvin?
So I put this one in just to create a discussion of it because Firefox and Chrome are both going to start doing this.
Yeah.
DNS over HTTPS, and so this person decided to do some little comic there to kind of show why they think it's bad because they're from Switzerland, I believe.
Yeah, I think I'm not getting the point. Their point is use Doe, so you will eventually go to a DNS resolver and they can see what you're doing. But that's the same if you don't use Doe. You go to a DNS resolver and they can see what you're doing. What exactly?
Pi-hole also freaked out about this.
Who did?
Pi-hole put out a Pi-hole, take a Raspberry Pi, turn it into a DNS server for ad blocking and all that. They also released instructions on how to edit the configuration of it to prevent Firefox from implementing this.
Well, now that is the concern I've heard before, that if you have encrypted DNS, you can't use DNS blocking to block ads. But that is the whole point. You have privacy, and people that want to do content filtering can't filter the content anymore, just like a VPN. But these guys just say Cloudflare is terrible and you should be resolving locally. And I think that's a very strange perception. If you were to use OpenDNS or Google or anything, I mean, you could point your tunnel at something else. I'm just adding encryption to DNS is something I've been advocating for a long time. And I don't really understand these arguments that somehow it makes you more at risk.
Right. I don't think they're denying the DNS should be secured. Their complaint is where it's going. Well, right, but just like to your point, like if you have a local DNS and that's encrypted, well then that's keeping track. If you do it to Google or Cloud9 or any of the others, like you're still, or Quad9, not Cloud9.
Yeah, Quad9. Yeah, I know. I mean, I think all they're saying, this is like complaining about an early version. So the first version will just go to one DNS server. Maybe an upgrade would then let you choose from a list of 10 in case you care. It seems to me like they're just complaining senselessly, but a lot of people.
I picked this one just to poke at the bear.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting to see the kickback, but I think this is the perfect being the enemy of the good. Right now, you're sending it in plain text to everybody. Now you're encrypting it to Cloudflare, and they're saying that's not good enough. I say, well, that's a step forward. And if you want to have another upgrade that does more, that might be good too.
Right. I mean, if you're so scared about Cloudflare, then make another.
Yeah. Well, and of course, there is a big issue here, which is that because Americans let the companies spy on everybody and sell the data and use the data without limit, we have these gigantic services like Google and Cloudflare that are free, and Europe doesn't have any free stuff like that because it's harder to make money over there. So they use American services where they have no privacy, and they have to pretend not to know that and cover it with transparent legal barriers like there was a special law just to allow that temporarily, and then another special law to allow that. It is, they want to have their cake and eat it too.
Right. But yeah, it's an interesting take.
Definitely.
Like you said, we're moving in the right direction. It's going to take a step at a time, and
I think we are. And if you use a VPN, it does the same thing as Doe already. It moves your stuff through there. And then you're trusting your VPN provider. But before, you were just trusting everybody. Anyway, so I thought this was very interesting. Snowden just put out a book. And a lot of people are discussing Snowden again and deciding whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. And I think Jake Williams is well qualified. I think he used to work for the military, like the NSA or something like that. And he has his discussion, and he seems generally to feel like Snowden is justified because, in fact, if you say people inside the U.S. military should be telling their boss about this, of course, they don't want to hear it. And you can't tell them that what you're doing is illegal and they will just fire you or shut you up. And at some point, you're concealing illegal activities, and the only option you have is to become complicit or to leak it out as a whistleblower, which is what he did. But anyway, it's very interesting issues here. I hear a lot of this. People saying he's a Russian spy because he ended up in Russia. He's a Chinese spy because he went through Hong Kong. But there's another side to that. That is probably not true. But I hear a lot of people yelling at him. Certainly he's in big trouble. I mean, he signed a non-disclosure agreement and then he disclosed the stuff. So his lawyer said, never come back. I don't want to defend you. You're going to lose if you come back. And other people say he should be pardoned, but I don't think there's any momentum in that. But I just think it's very interesting to hear it from an insider. And I was surprised to see an insider say Snowden was somewhat justified with what he did. So.
Yeah, usually they definitely seem to take the opposite tack as far as most government people that I've spoken to, they're not fans. So that is very interesting.
And he says the intelligence community was breaking the law and they were lying under oath about it to Congress, which does make it sound like perhaps Snowden was justified to that extent in what he did.
Right.
Anyway, we got one more from Elizabeth here. Oh, Ring.
Yeah, so this one's pretty interesting. We talked about last week, one of my stories that we talked about had to do with Ring and police departments and how, a lot of the time those relationships aren't very transparent to the public, which is kind of interesting. Well, in the ongoing saga, this week's story has to do with the California Consumer Privacy Act. So that got our governor signed that in last summer, and it's set to take effect January 1st of 2020. So there's been this is pretty much the last chance our legislature has to modify that. So there's been a ton of activity there around it during this current session. And one that's very interesting, one story that came out that's very interesting to me is that one of our assemblywomen is married to the chief operating officer of the Ring division at Amazon. And, she insists that none of this has anything to do with her relationship with her husband, but boy, it's kind of suspect. So some of the things that she voted against were provisions such as, for one, she voted to strike out a section of the regulations that would offer would offer consumers the right to ask that their any data associated with a household, quote unquote, that would be deleted or that they'd be able to access that. And now, of course, now that would encompass data collected through Ring. Another one that I thought was very interesting was that she advocated that they strike out a provision that would require systems like Alexa or Google Home to obtain user consent to sell recorded conversations to any other corporations, which to me, that's huge. They wouldn't even need to require your consent. They wouldn't even need to bury it in the 5-page long EULA that nobody reads. They'd just be able to carte blanche sell it to whoever they want. And I think that that's pretty gross.
Yeah.
And pretty, I think it's pretty disingenuous to say, oh yeah, that this has nothing to do with my own personal financial interests.
Yeah, well, there ought to be conflict of interest regulations for lawmakers, but obviously we don't have them, right up to the president, who just completely ignored
and I think that's,
the emoluments clause.
It really seems like that's just getting more and more blatant. People used to seem to be a little more conscientious about it due to the fact that it created such bad optics, but I think that it's, like other things, becoming more and more acceptable now due to the fact that the president does it, no one seems to care. So why shouldn't everybody else?
Yeah. It makes me think of the pay raises at this college in Los Angeles. The administrators just double their own pay, and there don't seem to be any consequences. You look bad for a week, then everybody forgets and goes on. So,
yeah, and really there aren't. So, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Maybe somebody remembers it when elections come around, but probably not. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's no oversight. They don't get in trouble.
Yeah, well, this is how democracies fall when corruption gets too big. And we're certainly far more corrupt than we used to be. At least it seems that way to me. I haven't seen an analysis, but on a global scale, we're much less corrupt than nations like, say, Russia or China.
Well, yes and no. One of the big problems with this story anyway, is that this California Consumer Protection Act, historically California law has informed our national law. Basically, it's our data protection law, stuff like that starts out here as a state law and then becomes adopted federally later on. So this is pretty high stakes. As far as I'm concerned, if people are just getting away with such little oversight when they're making these rules now, we might not see a ton of immediate impact, but 5 years down the line, this could have some very far-reaching consequences. And I think that it could be. This is the kind of thing where we're really treading the line between we're really treading the line between security and liberty here, because we're kind of willingly handing over these powers of surveillance, not only to the government and the police, but also to private corporations to buy, sell, and trade at will without our knowledge. And that's a big deal. So.
It is. And I think this is why we need, like the EFF, you constantly need to push back. People will always be trying to corrupt the system and exploit us more, and you just have to keep pushing back. It never stops.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I guess that's it. Anybody got any last remarks?
There's an OWASP meeting today or tonight.
Oh, is there? Where's that?
At Lyft HQ.
Oh, down south then?
San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good thing to know. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to stop share.
Okay.
All right. Very well.